Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, as-salatu wa-salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So we're continuing with our series on Da'u wa Dawa by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, also known as Al-Jawab al-Kafi liman sa'ala an al-Dawa al-Shafi. We went over in the first section four therapeutic principles that Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah extracts from the Islamic tradition regarding, as we spoke about, any problem, any disease. And these diseases can be spiritual diseases, mental illnesses, they could be physical diseases, really any problem, a behavioral issue, a sin that a person is struggling with. Anything that requires therapy, which basically means you want to change something about yourself. So we extracted 5 principles from his work, and we went over 4 of them. The first principle was, there's always a cure, so there's always hope. And that comes from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ma anzalallahu da'an illa anzala lahu shifa." That Allah doesn't send down any disease except He's also sent down the cure. The second principle was that the type of cure or the category of cure is based on the category of illness. And so the cure to ignorance is, what was the cure to ignorance? Very good, to ask, as the Prophet ﷺ said, and of course that means knowledge. That's the way to get knowledge, is to ask questions. The third principle was that the Quran is actually a cure for all categories of illness. And we went into some detail about the role of the Quran or recitation of the Quran, ruqya, even when it comes to physical illnesses. Then we spoke about principle 4, which was that dua can change al-qadr. That dua can actually change al-qadr. And we went into what exactly that phrase means. And we called this spiritual physics, because we spoke about how Ibn al-Qayyim is actually presenting an additional, you can say, force to consider when thinking about physical outcomes, or we're thinking about reality, or we're thinking about your life. It's not just the physical things that you see that influence your life and what happens with your life, but it's also spiritual things like dua, for instance. And we spoke about other factors as well, like ayn, even the evil eye as well. Now we come to the final principle, which is principle 5. A weapon depends on its wielder. And this we've termed spiritual pharmacodynamics. Sorry, you can tell that someone on our team was studying for their pharmacy exam. But spiritual pharmacodynamics, what does that mean exactly? What it means is that, so pharmacodynamics in general basically means, how does the substance that you're taking affect your body, and how does your body affect the therapeutic potential of the drug or the medication that you're taking? That's pharmacodynamics. So it's not just that the medicine will work all the time, but sometimes a person's body is in a certain way that it may increase their therapeutic effectiveness, or it might decrease it and make it stunted. And so your body actually affects how potent the medicine is. And so similarly, Ibn al-Qayyim actually argues the same thing. Your iman and your soul affects how useful dua is in your life. So whilst dua is as we said, can change al-qadr, and it is clearly the first advice that Ibn al-Qayyim is giving to the questioner, is essentially to make dua. But Ibn al-Qayyim mentions an important principle here, which is that dua is not like a cookbook recipe. It's not an incantation. It's not some spell that just magically works because you've said the right wording in a language that you don't understand. But rather, dua is something real, and dua is something that is actually highly variable in terms of how impactful it is in your life. And there are many variables that affect the impact or the influence of dua in your life. And so we'll go through some of these, bi'Illahi ta'ala. But just to read the quote that we've selected from Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, dua and isti'adha. What is isti'adha? Isti'adha. What is isti'adha? Very good. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I take protection in Allah from the shaitan. This is isti'adha, seeking refuge. By the way, an interesting gem for those who are interested about the term isti'adha and a'udhu billah and its difference with istighfar and astaghfirullah. You don't say, so with isti'adha, there's the alif, sin, ta pattern. Alif, there's the ta that's there. Isti'adha, as you can hear it, right? And same thing with istighfar. Now, when you make istighfar, what do you say? Astaghfirullah. I seek Allah's forgiveness. Now, what does alif, sin, ta mean? It basically adds to a verb that you are seeking it. It is the seeking of that particular action or whatever it may be. You are seeking it. You are trying. You are attempting. So, istighfar is seeking Allah's forgiveness. And astaghfirullah, I seek Allah's forgiveness. Now, isti'adha is seeking Allah's a'udh or His protection. Is seeking Allah's protection. Isti'adha. But you don't say, there's no alif, sin, ta pattern. You say a'udhu billah. You actually don't use the alif, sin, ta pattern. You don't hear it there. And so the proper translation is actually, I take refuge in Allah. You're not seeking it. You're not attempting it. You are declaring that you are under the protection of Allah. Now, subhanAllah, in the old days, when tribes would fight with each other or try to single out a particular individual, the way that they would try to defend themselves would be to declare, I'm under the protection of so-and-so tribe. You don't know who I'm friends with, right? Just wait till you... I mean, still to this day, this kind of principle still prevails. SubhanAllah. When the isti'adah is so powerful, because in the face of shaitan or the potential threat of shaitan, you are declaring to shaitan, I am under the protection of Allah. I take protection in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it's a very powerful dua itself. In any case, dua and isti'adah are like swords. Dua and isti'adah are like swords. Their effectiveness is based on the one using it and not just its sharpness. So he's saying, you've got dua and isti'adah. These are two very powerful weapons. The most powerful weapons is dua and isti'adah. And he's saying, this weapon or the sword is so sharp. Obviously, that's going to be determining the efficacy of that particular sword. But its effectiveness is not just based on that. Only when the sword is perfect without defect, the wielder is strong. That's the second point. So the weapon has to be good, but the person using the weapon has to be strong. And there's no shield for what you're trying to strike. Then your enemy can be wounded. If any of these factors are deficient, then the effect becomes deficient. We're on page 9. Uncle Fadlullah on page 9. If any of these factors are deficient, then the effect becomes deficient. So here he makes actually 3 different factors in terms of how powerful the dua will be in your life. The first one is the sharpness of it, like how powerful the actual weapon is. The sword is perfect without defect. And so if you're making dua, for example, and you don't mention the names of Allah, you're not asking Allah by His names, you're not using multiple names, you don't include the salawat on the Prophet ﷺ, you aren't mentioning your state of need, you aren't utilizing prophetic du'as or du'as from the Quran. So these factors will make your dua blunt or sharp. So the dua itself can be blunted because it's just, can I have this? Can I have a new car? There's no asking for the akhirah. It's just focused on the dunya. There's so many things that will make your plea to Allah blunt. So the dua itself has to be sharp. Then the second thing is the wielder. You can say the most perfect dua. The dua from the Prophet ﷺ, the dua of Surah Al-Fatiha. Is that sharp? Of course. Those are the most powerful weapons to the believer. The du'as that come from the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah, and from the Quran. This is the armory. Or if you want to use the pharmaceutical analogy, that's the chemist, right? That's where all the different medications are. Those are where all the du'as are. That's where all the remedies are. But the second factor is the wielder has to be strong. If you can't pick it up, how are you going to use it? You can have the best weapon, but if you don't know how to use it, khalas, if you're not strong enough to use it, you can't use it. And so the analogy for dua is the strength of the person's iman. How much yaqeen do they have in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How strong their iman is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The higher the iman, the more likely, of course, the acceptance of the dua. And the weaker the faith, the more doubt, the more I'm not sure, the more that the person himself is engaged in other haram things. There's another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a famous hadith that's found in the Arba'un al-Nawawi as well, about the person who is disheveled, he's a traveler, he's in a state of need, and he extends his hands to the heavens. يُمُدُّهُ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. He extends it to the heavens. And he calls out, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi. But then the Prophet ﷺ says, because this person, when you look at it, you think this is a person that his dua is going to be answered. He's disheveled, he's in a foreign place, he's calling out to his Lord in this intense state of desperation. But what does the Prophet ﷺ say? وَمَطَعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَلْبَسُهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُضِيَ بِالْحَرَامِ. His food is haram, his drink is haram, his clothing is haram. Everything about this person is coming from haram. فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. So how would Allah accept a dua from this person? So these are the iman factors or the individual factors that impact just how strong the dua is. And then the third point he mentions is the shield. Are there any things that are blocking up? And that's pretty much what I just mentioned there about lifestyle factors that become a shield. You put up the own shield that doesn't allow the impact of the dua to cover, is all these different mawani', these barriers to the dua being answered. Now, this is important because there's a lot of people that you can be a superstitious Muslim when it comes to dua and these sorts of things. You know, so many times if someone's going through a difficult time, they'll ask, give me something to read. Give me something to read. Should I read, how many times should I read Surah Lahab? I really can't stand my coworker. Give me, how many times should I read Surah Nasr? We want victory in Palestine. People want to bypass the genuine connection with Allah that is a necessary prerequisite to open up the potentials of dua. The necessary step is a genuine connection with Allah. But a lot of people want to bypass that. They don't pray as much, or they're not really as much into dua, and so they just want someone to tell them something to read a few times, and then that will bring healing for their family, or make it easy for whatever difficulties that they're going through. This type of superstitious approach is not something that is from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, who encouraged genuine connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you look at the Quran, it's very clear as well. SubhanAllah, there was a brother that came up to me after one of the Jum'ah khutbahs. This was like October, November of 2023. So of course, almost every khutbah was about Palestine. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liberate it. Ameen. And he came up to me and said, you need to include this in your next khutbah. I said, what is it? And he shows me this WhatsApp forward. And he says, if you say this, I think it was like some sort of small phrase of dhikr. If you say this 1,000 times, then the victory will come tomorrow. Just like that. Subhanallah, brother, where were you for 75 years? That's all it took. This is the point that I'm trying to get at. To try and bypass the genuine connection, bypass feelings of guilt, bypass the genuine work that's required the political work that's going to be required. Let's just find something to read and then I can feel better about myself that I did something for Palestine. This is an element of where it's coming from. It's a laziness. And just kind of being able to soothe yourself like you've done something. This is not anywhere found from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ anyways. In any case, this is an important point to ponder. Now, page 10 and 11 are for your personal reading, inshallah. Basically, this is not, the sections are not from Ibn al-Qayyim. We've kind of categorized it in this. Ibn al-Qayyim describes basically multiple ways that you can increase the sharpness of your dua. And so how do you increase the impact of your dua? There's many ways. So we've mentioned here 6 principles. And under each principle there's different things. And they're all in the analogy of someone wielding a sword. So the first one is sharpening that sword with conviction. So sharpening your dua with yaqeen. And that comes from the Prophet ﷺ, which is a very important principle. It is the principle of dua. And this is what I said, you can't bypass a genuine connection with Allah. Because this is not something you can fake. It's not something that's written down on a piece of paper. It's a state of your heart. Do you have conviction when you call upon the most merciful? Do you have conviction that that mercy will come to you? Do you have conviction that change can come to your life when you call upon the most powerful, Al-Qadir? Do you have conviction when you call upon Al-Fatih, that victory will come to Palestine? Do you have conviction that when you call upon Ash-Shafi, the one who cures, that the healing will come to your loved one or to yourself? Do you have conviction that when you call upon Al-Ghafur, the most forgiving, that the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come? Do you have conviction when you call upon Al-Latif, Al-Khabir, the most subtly kind and the one who is intimately aware of everything that you're going through, that your problems can be turned into relief? Is the conviction and the yaqeen there? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Udu'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijaba." Call upon Allah, make dua to Allah whilst you are convinced of the response. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَجِيبُ دُعَاءً مِنْ قَلْبٍ غَافِلٍ. And know that Allah will not accept, listen to this, Allah will not respond rather to a dua from a heart that is heedless. So these du'as that you're just reading out for blessing, is the heart actually interacting with the meanings? Is the heart actually allowing the meanings to come and impact the heart? Or is it just being read as an incantation? And so Allah will not respond to a dua if the heart isn't there. Many times as well, and this is really important for us because sometimes we think we come together, even you see after salah sometimes people are meant to be, people are making dua and you see everyone's just looking around. And then they're just letting the imam say whatever the imam wants to say and looking around and then holding their hands like this. And then once the imam finishes, just quickly wipe. Ameen. Where is the heart? Is this a qalb al-ghafil? This is not the way dua is meant to be. So in any case, you can see all the different points there. As I said, you can read through them. Strike at the right time. So those are different timings where it is authentically reported that it is more beloved, it is more likely that these du'as will be accepted. Using proper form. So that's the actual physical posture of the dua itself. I will mention one point here. A lot of people, when it comes to dua, they will make dua like this. But the Prophet ﷺ said to make dua with the palms of your hand. So it's more appropriate and correct to make the dua like this. Not like this. Increasing the strength of the strike based on more names and attributes of Allah. In particular, saying Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram. Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram. The ulama say that this combination of the Jalala and the Karama of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beautiful because there's the Jalal attributes and then there's the Jameel attributes, as some categorize the names and attributes of Allah into. There are the names and attributes of Allah that indicate His power, His might, His grandeur, His greatness, His magnificence. So these are the Jalal attributes. These are the glory attributes. They're all categorized within there. But then there is the attributes of His forgiveness, His love, His kindness, His generosity, His jood, His rahmah, His lutf. And these are the Jamil attributes, or the Jamal attributes, which are the beauty attributes, the attributes of His beauty. And so Dhul Jalali wal Ikram combines the two. The generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the power and the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's beautiful. The connection is beautiful. Because the same one who is the one full of grandeur, glory, power, is the same one who is also so kind and merciful. And so it brings forth such optimism. Because sometimes you can ask a nice person to help you, but that person doesn't necessarily have all of the means to actually change things for you. They can certainly be there for you as an empathic person and want to help you, but obviously their hands are tied. The most loving person to you, but they don't necessarily have the resources, the connections. But subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ala kulli shayin qadir wa latifun bima yasha. He is over all things powerful and in control. And He's the most kind, the most subtle, the most merciful, the most loving. And so there is no barrier to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah. Wallahu ta'ala alam. So we move on inshallah ta'ala to the next section, which is a section on sin. And Ibn al-Qayyim, the bulk of the book is really on this particular topic of sin, because that's what the questioner was asking about. This was, you can say, introductory principles about change and about how to change and dua and all those sorts of things. Now we move on to the concept of sin and desire itself. Now this particular section is broken into 4 parts. There's 4 parts. So if you go to the table of contents, you can see the 4 parts that are there. And so you can see in our book as well, it's the largest portion of the book from page 13 to 53. So these are the 4 parts of it. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through them. The anatomy of sin is basically going into what is sin and difference between major and minor sin, etc., etc. Then you go into what are the consequences of sin, or rather the psychology behind sin. Why do people sin? What are the gateways of the shaitan into our hearts, or the gateways of our nafs that enable us to commit sins? And so inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through that. So part 1, the anatomy of sin. So Ibn al-Qayyim categorizes sins into different ways. And so one of them is by form. And so he categorizes sins that manifest physically on the limbs. So these are sins that are actual physical actions. Stealing is a sin. Lying with your tongue is a sin. Hurting or abusing another person is a sin. And these are sins that are manifested with the limbs. Then there are sins that manifest only inside the heart. So jealousy, hasad is a sin. Arrogance, kibr is a sin. Now obviously there are outward manifestations of these diseases of the heart and of these sinful manifestations inside the heart. But in and of itself, it doesn't need to always surface. Hasad can be kept within. And Allah references this a lot when it comes to the people of the book. The hasad that was inside of them for the Prophet ﷺ that they used to hide and conceal within themselves. Now, the question often comes, what if I can't control this feeling that I have, this feeling of envy or this feeling of jealousy? Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, there's a passage that he spends on this concept, and he essentially concludes that when it comes to hasad or feelings of the heart that a person does not have control over, then it is for that person to resist against it as much as they can. They can't like that they feel this. They can't choose to relish in it. So say for instance, a person is feeling jealous towards another person and you haven't done it. So that's the other most important thing. You don't act upon it, meaning you don't act to undermine that person or act to harm that person from your hasad. So that's obviously number one. But number two, on the inside, you don't relish in it. You don't go talk to them to other people and start bad-mouthing that particular person. You don't, within yourself, start to like willfully fantasize of all the ways that you want to hurt this person or you're so upset about this person and relish and add fuel to that negative feeling. So that can become sinful even though you're not actually physically acting it out. But if you resist upon it, then you're rewarded for that resistance. Because there's a principle, of course, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, that Allah does not place a burden on a person more than he can bear. So there's a taklif, a burden of responsibility that Allah has given us, but that burden will never exceed our actual capability. So if there's something in your heart that you cannot control, then it's about resisting against it and ensuring that you're not physically acting in a way that's going to harm that person. The same thing as well, if a person maybe has a feeling in their heart for another person from the opposite gender, unmarried, same thing. This is something that it's in the heart. It's not something that is haram in and of itself, because it's something that comes to the hearts of Bani Adam. But the point is acting upon it and also relishing in it and fantasizing and increasing in it, playing love songs and all these sorts of things, and just thinking about this person that you might be obsessed with. All those things, even though you certainly the first feeling you didn't have control over, but you're adding fuel to the fire. And so then you are responsible for that. Then he categorizes it also based on relationship. So he says, and also by consideration, متعلقه إلى حق الله وحق لخلقه, that it can be categorized into the right of Allah and the right of His creation. وإن كان كل حق لخلقه فهو متضمن لحقه. Even though it's the case that all of the rights of His creation really ultimately belong also to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لكن سمي حقا للخلق, but it is called the right of the creation لأنه يجب بمطالبتهم ويسقط بإسقاطهم, because it is called the right of the creation because it becomes mandatory or it becomes binding based on their request, and it is dropped based on their dropping it. So that's why it's called a right belonging to the creation, even though nobody intrinsically has any rights. Everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah has given these rights to His servants. And so there's two ways of categorizing the sin. Does it violate the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or does it violate the right of His creation? And so sins, of course, between a person and Allah are sins that don't harm another individual. And this category is one that the West doesn't recognize. For them, it's just the harm principle. It's just violating the rights of His creation. They don't recognize this idea that you can violate the right of the Creator Himself. And obviously, what is more grave from a justice point of view, from a purely moral point of view, than violating the right of your Creator? Because the gravity of an injustice is not necessarily based on the harm. It's based in principle of the magnitude of the right that you're violating. A person who is disrespectful to their parents versus a person who is disrespectful to a friend or a colleague, which one is worse? Disrespectful towards parents. Why? Because of how much the parents did for you. That you're going to disrespect them even after everything they did for you? Then what is the case of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where your very existence, your very being, your very essence is something that you owe completely to Him? And so the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are obviously of a higher level and category. Ibn al-Qayyim describes 4 different descriptions of sin, or 4 different psychological profiles of sin. We actually went through these in Ramadan when we were going through our healing through the Quran series. I think it was the last class actually. We actually went through these 4 categories. So these are psychological profiles of sin. And a person may have one or more of these tendencies. And they're very useful ways to understand where sin comes from, because they're all not coming from the same thing. Like sin isn't just this thing that, oh, I disobeyed Allah, may Allah forgive me, and then move on. As if it just came from a vacuum, just popped spontaneously into your brain and you decided to do something. But Ibn al-Qayyim here, he's showing and demonstrating, and this is something recognized by the ulama, these four descriptions of sin, that there's a certain profile of an individual, or there's a certain psychology that is indicated by the type of sin that a person is predisposed to committing. So the four, number one is Malikiyya, which is, I've translated it as like God complex. The second one is Shaytaniyya or Satanic. The third one is Sab'iyya or Predatory. And the fourth one is Bahimiyya or Hedonistic. So for the first one, Malikiyya, these are the sins that are like the Pharaonic sins. These are the sins from people who want to control other people. They want power for itself because they believe that they are deserving and entitled for this particular power. Fir'aun, he said, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la." I am your Lord Most High. You can't get more God complex than that. He literally said, I am your Lord Most High, when competing with Musa alayhi salam's da'wah. So the God complex is obviously of levels within itself. But the genre of sin here are people who try to dominate others, try to control others, want to be in positions where they have absolute control over things, want to be able to enslave other people as well in its more extreme sense. Genocide, being able to choose, who gets to live, who gets to die, being the person that drives all the decisions. This is from the Malikiyya, from the sins that are Malikiyya, where a person wants to be the king, a person wants to be the top dog. And this is the case with most people in politics. Most of them are narcissists. You have to be to get into politics, and when I say politics, I mean not political activism and trying to bring about change. I'm talking about to get into positions of leadership within any government, to actually want to go and then to lobby others and to promote yourself and to try and get votes and everything like this. Normal person would be like, I don't want to do that. I don't think I'm qualified to do that. It takes a very strange person to say, I think I'm qualified to be the Prime Minister of Australia or the President of the United States of America. Yeah, that's me. Most people are like, I don't think I'm qualified for that. So it takes a certain level of narcissism, obviously. And it can take place not just in this realm. Some people, and it's closely related to this, it's not as bad, but some people have a hero complex. They're so obsessed with this idea of being a hero. They want to save other people, which is a good thing. This is obviously a very good thing. But the point is that it's not about saving the people, it's about the perception of you being a hero, either from others or even yourself. Some people are just obsessed with this idea of being the hero. And they neglect themselves because they want to buy into that narrative almost. So that's really important as well. And this is why in our deen, there's a huge danger, and the Prophet ﷺ said, do not give this ri'ayah, do not give this responsibility of leadership to people who seek it. If someone is wanting to be the leader and wanting to be a leader, you don't give it to that person. You give it to the person that doesn't want it. You give it to the person that everyone knows is qualified, but they are terrified of the responsibility that comes with it. You see, the West values leadership intrinsically. If you're a leader, it's a good thing in the West because it's a sign of material success, because you're leading some sort of material thing. In Islam, it's not a sign of material success or success. It's a sign of massive responsibility and liability. In the West, it's a success. In Islam, it's a massive liability in the Akhirah. It's a terrifying thing to hold. there's a trend in the West amongst many of the Muslims because they've taken in a lot of these influences as well, growing up, as I did as well, through their schooling system, through university, through the kind of social structures that exist through the corporate world, wherever it may be. There is a trend, I'm not sure if it's in Australia, but in Canada and in America and other places as well, you see these kind of award ceremonies, these kind of self-congratulatory events where people come in and they say, oh, Muslim of the year, or best this, or this, and oh, it's meant to be a place where we inspire everybody, but of course the ticket's like $150, $200 to go and sit there to have the dinner and everything like this, and it's just a way for everyone to pat everyone on the head. This is not really an Islamic spirit. This concept of recognizing someone for leadership, or that's not what it's about. That's not the ethos of a Muslim. I understand the concept of encouraging people. That's a very important thing, no doubt. What kind of encouragement does like a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old really need at that point? I mean, you need to encourage young kids maybe, give them prizes and that sort of thing to encourage them on the path. At that point, you should really be self-motivated. You're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what this does is it creates this environment of people, it attracts people who are prone to this illness of this power-seeking, leadership, hero complex, God complex. And you see this as one of the biggest barriers to progress within our institutions, of course, is because these sorts of leadership positions, who obviously is attracted to taking those positions? It's going to be people, obviously, who want to be in that level of position and status in the community. And so, this is something that is a problem all across the world. This is not specific to any particular community or anything like this, but everyone knows that within the institutions, there are always going to be egos, there's always going to be challenges and difficulties, and that's one of the most difficult things. And you saw it early on in Islamic history. After the generation of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, those who took the mantle of leadership, they would just be killing people left, right, and center to keep their power. They'd kill their family members, kill their brothers, kill children, whatever it may be. Like, these are our early, Muslim leaders after the Khulafa al-Rashidun. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, but really, we live in a society that breeds this idea of, being a leader is a good thing, and being, having this material success is a good thing, and we lose the real spirit of what it means to be a volunteer, which is just helping fi sabilillah. What fi sabilillah or lillah really means, right? Doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second one is Shaytaniyya. These are sins that resemble the shaitan. In what way? Essentially, these are sins where a person, the psychological profile is that the person enjoys seeing another person go through harm, even though that they're not going through any benefit. Like, they just enjoy seeing another person go through harm. Siblings, you'll see this because obviously young kids, they're not yet fully developed and mature. Sometimes they just like to see the other sibling just get in trouble. Just enjoy it. It's cute, obviously, when they're little kids, but obviously as they grow up and that becomes more and more problematic and the stakes become higher, that's obviously not a good thing. But it's coming from this. And why do we say the Shaytaniyya? Because this is the case with Shaitan and Adam alayhi salam. Shaitan hated Adam and was envious of him and was jealous. And so he concocted a plan to remove Shaitan from Jannah and send him down to this earth and this Dar al-Ibtila and this world of trial and test. What benefit does Shaitan get from this? Did Shaitan think if I do this, then I can get back to my number one slot? No, he knew that it was all over for him. He knew that. He said, Rabbi bima aghwaytani, my Lord, because you have misguided me. لَأَقْعُدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, I will sit at your Sirat al-Mustaqim. ثُمَّ لَآتِيَنَّهُمْ Then I will come to them. مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ وَعَنْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ وَعَنْ شَمَائِلِهِمْ وَلَا تَجِدُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ شَاكِرِينَ I'll come in front of them, behind them, to the right of them, to the left of them, and you won't find many of them grateful. What benefit does shaitan get from any of this? Zero. He knows where he's going to go. That's why he knows he's going to hellfire, but he says to Allah, أَنظِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ Just give me time until they're resurrected. And then he declares his mission is just to basically drag as many people to hell. So he gets zero benefit, but he enjoys. And he loves seeing people go through harm and misery and hardship and pain. There's that narration in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet ﷺ describes that the shaitan actually has a throne. And this throne is sitting on the water. Not the Bermuda Triangle. In the jinn world, in a place of water, connected to this earth. And different people come and they're telling him their daily progress. It's their daily progress. And he's saying, well, someone said, I did kada kada, I made someone do kada wa kada, I made someone do this and this and that. And he basically says, you haven't done anything, you haven't done anything. Then one person comes, or one shaitan comes and says, ما تركته حتى فرقت بينه وبين امرأته. I didn't leave that person until I caused him to separate from his wife. Now, it's actually not divorce his wife. The word is faraq, which is just to separate. I caused some separation and discord and difficulty within the marriage, and I caused them to separate from each other. Then, that is when the shaitan says, Ni'ma ant, how amazing you are. Can you imagine someone relishing in just seeing a husband and a wife fighting with each other? That they enjoy it? They're happy about it? Another narration, also in Sahih Muslim, it's mentioned that the shaitan has lost hope. أَئِسَ أَن يُعْبَدْ فِي جَزِيرَةِ الْعَرَبِ He has lost hope that he will be worshipped in the Arabian Peninsula. وَلَكِنْ But rather, he is satisfied with تَحْرِيش بَيْنَكُمْ with sowing discord between you, causing issues between people. And so these sins, human beings can also commit. They come from envy, they come from jealousy, wanting other people to be hurt, wanting other things to just go down south, wanting to see the drama. You know, sometimes there's friends who just ignite things and they just set people off because they just want to see and they want to feed into the drama. They just enjoy it. They just enjoy seeing the show. Psychopaths are here as well, obviously, and sociopaths, just seeing people get hurt for no particular reason. It's not just harming people, but also the shaitani sins is about misguiding people and hating religion. Not just hating people, hating religion. Hating God. And inspiring that in people. And we know of so many, especially living in such a secular society, there are so many people who can't help but constantly just hate on religion and hate on God. This is from the Shaytaniyya. We saw a very relevant example of this recently with the Olympics in France. The opening ceremony. You see this disgusting mockery of Isa alayhi salam and the depiction of the Last Supper, which is a biblical concept. In Islam, in the Quran, we have the concept of the Ma'idah, the table spread that came from the heaven. Perhaps it's describing the same event. And just the complete blasphemous showing of that particular event about Isa alayhi salam, and the mockery that was there, and the relishing of that, and the celebration of that. This points towards that satanic mentality, that the shaitan is obviously running through these societies and these people, and some people really hate religion. Now there's different reasons for that. There's different reasons for that. Some people have been hurt by religious institutions. Some people have been betrayed by religious leadership, and so they end up hating religion altogether. This is the case. And some people even leave Islam for that because they see the hypocrisy in the community. They witness something, a cover-up of a horrific crime or oppression that was done towards someone, and everyone just covered it up because of this person's status or their connection to the Imam, or it was the Imam himself, or whoever it may be. These sorts of things. Some people can get angry with it. That doesn't justify then hating God, of course. I mean, most things that people do that are evil and bad, there's usually a backstory. There's usually something there, something bad happened to them. That never justifies the crimes that they do afterwards. That just shows us that Allah doesn't create pure evil people. Human beings are complex. There's some good and there's some bad. Sometimes more bad than good. And oftentimes it takes something terrible that happens to them to turn a person towards evil. And that's what we're meant to have, is some sabr and patience, not to go down that road. Like some people they've been betrayed so much, not maybe by religion, but just in general. And they just hate life. They just hate people. Like they've lost their faith in humanity. And they just want to see everything burn. That's it. They want to, and they get happy when they see things that are propped up in society to be seen as symbols of goodness and purity, like religious institutions. They actually get happy when they see scandals and when they see these things being tainted, because it validates their assumption, understanding that, oh, there's no good in this world. So some people can really be in that particular state. So this is from the Shaytaniyya. Then there is the Sab'iyya, the predatory sins. These are sins where you could cause harm to other people, but it's because of a personal benefit to yourself. It's not because you enjoy seeing other people get hurt, but you're selfish. And you don't want to let anything go that could come to you. Some sort of benefit that someone else has, a possession, wealth, status, a promotion, whatever it may be, you undermine people, you manipulate other people just for your own particular self-interest. This is the predatory, Sab'iyya, sins of aggression, anger. You see this as the siblings go from the Shaytaniyya warring, they usually go to the Sab'iyya sins amongst each other in dysfunctional families, where one sibling tries to basically manipulate and ensure that they get all the family finances. Particularly when it comes to inheritance, there's a horrible culture within some subcultures in the Muslim world where actually the oldest male sibling or the oldest son takes all the inheritance and does not give anything to their sisters. And they'll claim XYZ, whatever it may be. This is a huge injustice. They're taking literally fire into their bellies. And this is something very, very common. This is from the Sab'iyya, predatory. Someone vulnerable and weak and you can control, and oh, just my sister, etc., etc. And so you go and you take all these things by force. You know how to write things in the way that's legal and the way that can protect you so that you take everything. And nobody else thought about it, that this would be the case, and you've organized in a certain way so that you can take everything for yourself. This is Sab'iyya. This is from the sins of the predatory nature of sins, that a person is just in it for themselves and they'll manipulate any situation for their own personal gain. Sometimes you see this with friends as well. Like, they're not really your friends, they're kind of fake friends. They're friends that are there to use you, use your resources, use your connections, use whatever it may be, and that's why they're there. That's it, just to use you. The fourth is Bahimiyya, the hedonistic sins. These are sins that aren't about trying to take something from someone else or harming other people. It's about fulfilling your desires. The desires of the stomach and the desires of the sexual organs. So these desires and just fulfilling these desires, things like stealing or obviously zina, this is the Bahimiyya. just like cattle basically, just like sheep or just like cows essentially. That all they do is eat, drink, and procreate, and that's it. Now, what's the problem with this? Because this is a category, again, that the West doesn't recognize. Everything else I mentioned here, the West recognizes as something that's negative. This one, they just see as what's the problem? As long as it's not hurting anyone, and there's no harm given to anyone, what's the problem? Why is it so bad that this person, wants to do something to fulfill a desire, and they're not hurting anyone? Why is it so bad? The reason why fulfilling desires like this, that are unregulated and unrestricted, is bad is because it creates a fragile soul, a fragile person, a weak person, that when inevitably the difficulties of life will come, they will completely lose it. They will have no resilience. Not only that, at the first drop of difficulty, they'll betray all their responsibilities, and they'll betray their responsibilities to other people. Look at people who are affected with drug addiction. Look at people who are just focused on completely fulfilling their desires. Do they fulfill the responsibility of their children that they end up having oftentimes out of wedlock? Are they there? Are they ensuring that they're getting an income that is necessary to sustain them appropriately, to pay for things like education, to pay for nutrition even? Or are they just busy fulfilling their desires? So here's the point. They think it's just a purely victimless crime. But the concept of unrestricted, unregulated fulfilling of desires, even the West recognizes as a problem. That's why they have drug and alcohol problems. That's why they have these awareness issues of, drink responsibly, gamble responsibly. You see all these ads about this. Recognizing that just completely fulfilling your desires is problematic, and they recognize the harm that it will bring to the individual. You might not be harming another person, but you're harming yourself. And even the West has recognized that society has some responsibility to stop people from harming themselves. That's why suicide it's interesting, but it's illegal. However that makes sense. Obviously it can't be enforced, obviously. But there are steps that are taken to stop people from committing suicide. I was just seeing a video of the history of the Story Bridge in the city. And they didn't used to have that ugly little fence that, obscures your vision of the beautiful skyline of Brisbane. That was introduced, I forgot what year was it. Amna, do you remember? You don't remember, okay. I think it was recent. It was recent that they erected these fences. Why did they do that? To stop people from committing suicide. It's a victimless crime though. It's just themselves and harming themselves. No, they're also harming their families, etc., etc. But isn't that the case for other desire sins as well? Alcohol and gambling and sexual issues and all these sorts of things. Doesn't that also harm other people as well? So it's a bit inconsistent, and it's very difficult to actually remove this harm principle. Harm is everywhere. In fact, Ibn Taymiyyah mentions this as well, that when it comes to sin, all sin is what is harmful to a human being. Like there's nothing that is considered a sin and evil in Islam that is not harmful to a person. The issue is that they don't recognize the harm that is going to their soul, and they don't recognize, they do recognize, I shouldn't say that, but they choose to turn a blind eye to it. I mean, if you look at the amount of deaths that you can attribute to alcohol, it is insane. The amount of domestic violence that can be attributed to alcohol and drugs, it is insane. Why isn't alcohol a public health issue that is now being turned into something that's banned? How extreme did we take the measures when it came to coronavirus? But something like alcohol that they know, the statistics are there. I'm talking about things like physical, we didn't even talk about physical diseases and all of the cost to the healthcare system that can be attributed to the fact that alcohol is legal in this country. But they remove all these things. Bismillah. Okay. Page 16. The major and the minor sins. The major and the minor sins. So as we know in Islam, not all sins are the same. And there are sins that are considered major and there are sins that are considered minor. And what's the proof for this? It's in the Quran itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن تَجْتَنِبُوا كَبَائِرَ مَا تُنْهَوْنَ عَنْ نُكَفِّرَ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ وَنُدْخِلْكُمْ مُدْخَلًا كَرِيمًا. If you avoid the major sins which you are forbidden, we will remove from you your lesser sins and admit you into a place of honor. And another verse in Surah An-Najm, الَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشَ إِلَّا اللَّمَمْ. Those who avoid the major sins and immoralities despite stumbling on minor sins. And so we see the lamam, or the minor sins, and we see the kaba'ir, the major sins. And so this demarcation is actually in the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ also references it as well. From the hadith in Sahih Muslim, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ said, الصلوات الخمس والجمعة إلى الجمعة والرمضان إلى رمضان مكفرات ما بينهن مجتنبت الكبائر. That the 5 daily prayers, one Friday, one Jum'ah to the next Jum'ah, one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, are all expiations of sins. Meaning between each prayer, between Fajr to Dhuhr, everything in between, if you prayed Fajr and prayed Dhuhr, all of that is kafara, has been expiated. All those sins are gone. From Jum'ah to Jum'ah, you prayed Jum'ah last week, tomorrow inshallah ta'ala you make it, it is expiation for the entire week before. From Ramadan to Ramadan, you fasted this Ramadan, and in the Ramadan to come, everything in between. It is a mukaffarat, it is expiation of everything in between them, as long as the major sins are avoided. As long as the major sins are avoided. And so, Ibn al-Qayyim argues very vehemently and passionately in the book that this applies to people who are actively abstaining from major sins. That a person who is happy and continuing and indulging in major sins, they will not have anything forgiven between these salawat and between Jum'ah to Jum'ah or to Ramadan. It's only, as the condition of the Prophet ﷺ mentions, the person who is avoiding the kaba'ir. So this is not saying that all the minor sins are forgiven and except for the major sins. It's saying in order for the minor sins to be forgiven, a person has to start actively avoiding the major sins. There are other narrations though about fasting in Arafah forgives 2 years of sins, and Ashura forgives another year of sins. When it comes to this, some scholars, they actually say that, so for the Hajj for instance, so Hajj Mabrur, we know what is the reward for Hajj Mabrur? That they emerge on that day as if their mother just gave birth to them. So it's expiation of all the sins. Does this include the major sins? This is a classic difference amongst the ulama. Most of the scholars say no, only the minor sins. Major sins require tawbah, require specific repentance for that specific sin, that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you for that very specific major sin that you did. And each major sin requires a specific tawbah, category of sin. Yani, if a person has done, perhaps maybe they were abandoned, maybe they committed, they committed robbery multiple times. It's asking Allah and it's repenting to Allah from robbery as a general thing, not going back and thinking each particular day and each time that they stole something. It's the tawbah from that whole category, that sin, and every time that you've done it. That's what's required. Some of the ulama make the exception for Hajj, and they say that for Hajj it also includes the kaba'ir, because the hadith is very general and says that just like their mother gave birth to them, which is obviously nothing recorded there. And this is the position of Ibn Rajab and Ibn Mundhir. Excuse me. Imam al-Nawawi says something interesting about fasting in Arafah and Ashura in his sharh of the Sahih Muslim. He says that if there are no minor sins, and a person fasts in Arafah, then it will start to take away from the major sins. Which is an interesting point. If a person doesn't have any minor sins, but they have some major sins, then it's a bit of an interesting concept. So it's highly unlikely. And the point that's emphasized is that major sins require specific tawbah. Now, we'll end with this particular discussion, inshallah, and that is, what are the major sins? Okay, we understand major sins require tawbah, specific tawbah, and minor sins are things that are expiated by living your daily life as a Muslim. There's that spiritual hygiene. Living your life as a Muslim is constantly shedding out all these minor sins that we accumulate throughout the day. So, what are the major sins? One position is that there are only 7 major sins. This is a minor position, but it's based on the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, and that hadith is provided in page 17. It's the second hadith there, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ijtanibu sab'al mubiqat." Avoid the 7 destructive. And then the Prophet ﷺ lists 7 sins. But the majority say that this does not include other sins that the Prophet ﷺ has also described as being major, such as the first hadith that we've put forward there on page 17. Uquq al-walidain is not mentioned in that second hadith, but it's mentioned in the first one, where the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the major sins, and he said, al-ishraku billah wa uquq al-walidain wa qatl al-nafs wa shahadatu zur. He mentions 4. Shirk, being disrespectful or causing distress to parents. Qatl al-nafs, killing an innocent soul. Wa shahadatu zur, and false testimony. And not some of these, particularly uquq al-walidain, is not mentioned in that second one. So they say it's not, that hadith doesn't limit it to 7, but the Prophet ﷺ is describing these 7 major sins as the mubiqat, destructive sins, that they are particularly destructive to a person's life. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, he said that the number is probably closer to 70 than it is to 7. From this, Al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, who died 748 after the Hijrah, he actually wrote a book called Al-Kaba'ir, the book of the major sins. It's actually translated to English. And he basically has a list. And he includes 76 sins that he has deemed as the major sins. And what was his inclusion criteria? His inclusion criteria was any sin that has been connected in the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to one of 3 things. Punishment in this dunya, like that's a legal punishment that is to be made. A curse, like la'na, where the Prophet ﷺ will curse this person who does a particular thing. And number 3, threatening of a punishment in the akhirah. These are the 3 inclusion criterion. Any one of these 3 is then included, and Al-Dhahabi comes with this list of 76. And you can find that online. And so these are very important points to obviously understand, because these are sins that we need to make specific tawbah from. And included within this is lying, backbiting, slandering other people. The shahadat zur is a scary one. In fact, in another narration, the Prophet ﷺ got up and said, shahadat zur, shahadat zur, shahadat zur, shahadat zur. And he kept repeating it. So he was reclining before, and when he was telling them about the major sins, he said, shirk billah, uquq al-walidain, qatl al-nafs. And then he got up. And then he said, wa shahadatu zur, wa shahadatu zur, wa shahadatu zur, wa shahadatu zur. And the companion said, he said this so many times that we wished that he would stop. We wished that he would stop. Now obviously that's out of concern for the Prophet ﷺ, that meaning that he's so distressed about this. Now the emphasis on shahadatu zur is very important. Why? Because especially, the lives that we live as well, the amount of things that are just so easy to pass on, but it's actually false testimony. You say something about someone that's not true, that's false testimony, that's shahadatu zur. You twist or you bend a story that didn't actually happen or exaggerated, that's shahadatu zur. For my medical colleagues, you bill something. Particularly for general practitioners, it's not the 6 minutes hasn't been met. Oh, it's about that, whatever, nobody knows. We'll bill it a bit higher to Medicare. That is shahadatu zur, a false testimony of what happened. You're going to work and you're supposed to put in your timesheet or whatever, and you say, oh, I'm just going to put whatever it is. Shahadatu zur. It's a very serious thing. And it's also something that we can take very lightly. But we have to have that level of integrity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and enable us to be truthful in speech and in action. Ameen. With that, inshallah ta'ala, we will conclude. Yes, we'll conclude inshallah ta'ala. And we will just finish up with the minor and major sins on page 18 next class inshallah ta'ala, and start part 2 bidhnillahi ta'ala next week. We'll take any questions.